title will give you 1 marks for each title we have not mentioned in the individual financial statement. And then for the total, we also will give you the marks on the total you are able to calculate. So the midterm test actually is already passed, but the performance is not quite well. For this group, your average mark is 49. For some group, the highest group, they will have the average mark of 62, and the lowest group, they will have the marks of 42. And for this group, your average mark is 48 or 49, something about that. So it will be fair, but it is not that performed quite well. But here, let me have my copy of the exercise 6.8 worksheet for you, so you can refer to the worksheet and then check your answer for your practice. Okay, so because of the performance of the midterm test, therefore I will add an extra class in the last week on 30th of April. This is the first day of the examination. So on that week, 26th of April, I will start a revision class, especially for mainly focus on the midterm test. So I will send you the details about the revision class. It is scheduled on 26th and then at 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you can spare the time for this revision class. So by the end of this week, I will send you the details about the revision class. So apart from the revision class, I will also send you an email about the final assessment. So for the final assessment this year, we will also make it as a take-home assignment. So you will have 5 hours to do 3 questions. So the details of the 3 questions, I will also send it out to you. So I will talk in details with you about the final assessment arrangement, and the details will be sent to you by the end of this week through email. And then next week's class, I will go through it together with you. Okay, so we have finished the chapter 6, and then today we will start a new chapter. So this new chapter, chapter 8, we will teach you for 2 weeks. So today we will cover about 75% of the PowerPoint slide, and then for the remaining, we'll go through in next class and also do the exercise together. Okay, so any questions about the midterms, about the revision class, about the final assessment? If yes, you can let me know now, or otherwise, we will start the class now. 好，有冇特別嘅問題？咁考試遲少少會呢個禮拜尾啦，會話俾你聽所有嘅 details 啦。咁測驗嘅分數咧，我哋都喺度入緊分，咁就希望都係禮拜尾可以俾到個分數同我睇啦。咁4月26號啦，10點至12點啦，咁我就會有一個 revision class 啦，就會講翻嗰個嘅midterm test 嘅。咁同學可以到時自己因翻時間再 join 翻嗰個 revision class 啦。咁嗰個 details 嘅時間啊，或者嗰個 MS Team 嘅 link 咧，咁我會遲啲 send 翻俾你啦。咁測驗一般般啦，咁好多同學其實都做到 console journal entry 嘅，好多都做到大部分嘅 console journal entry。咁主要都係唔係太識得 handle 嗰啲 upstream downstream 嘅 sales happening in last year in current year 嗰啲啦。咁我喺revision class 嘅時候咧，我未必會 exactly 俾晒個 answer for 嗰個 midterm test 你，但我會一定會教翻你每一樣嘢大概應該要係點樣做嘅。咁嚟緊嗰個final assessment 啦，都係 take home 啦。咁我哋而家有5個小時俾你做嘅。咁你亦都要留意翻啦。咁我下個禮拜同你講翻嗰個嘅內容嘅 details 啦。咁大致上係咁樣啦。咁我哋就上埋今個禮拜同下個禮拜咧，呢個 module 就完嘅啦。咁今個禮拜我哋會完成咗大部分嘅 chapter 8，下個禮拜我哋主要就會係做數啦。Okay, so if no questions, let's start our chapter 8 now. So chapter 8, it is talking about the effect of changes in foreign exchange rate. So we are talking about the exchange rate, how to translate the transactions. So there are 5 objectives. The first objective is to let you know what does it mean foreign exchange exposure. And when the company has entered into foreign exchange transaction, there will be foreign exchange exposure. And then we will differentiate between operating exposure and accounting exposure. So for foreign exchange exposure, we will divide them into 2. One is called operating exposure and one is called accounting exposure. And for our module, we will only focus on the accounting exposure. We will ignore the operating exposure. Third, we will talk about the concept of functional currency. I will introduce to you the concept about functional currency. Objective 4, we will understand the accounting treatment of foreign currency transaction. So when we come across with foreign currency transaction, what should we do? Finally, we will understand the procedure for translating the foreign currency financial statement. And these 3, 4, 5 are all, we will discuss it all together. So this 1 and 2 give you some idea, some introduction about the foreign exchange exposure. So first, introduction. So before 1974, the international monetary system looks like that. So most of the country, they will have fixed or official exchange rate system. This so-called fixed exchange rate system, that means their local currency, their country's local currency was pledged to the US dollar. And US dollar is pledged to the gold price. That means when the gold price goes up and down, the US dollar will goes up and down. Finally, the country who pledged to US dollar will follow the changes of the US and then follow the gold price. This is before 1974. And then after 1974, they decided we should not just have the fixed exchange rate system. They think that they should have floating exchange rate system. That means the floating is according to the demand and supply of the currency. And this will have a changes in the exchange rate, finally will affect the reporting and earnings. And now, how about nowadays? What is the monetary system? In Hong Kong, we are using the exchange rate linked to the key currency. 香港用緊聯繫匯率. So this exchange currency is we find out a key currency, that is the US dollar. And then our Hong Kong dollars exchange rate is fixed to the US dollar. That means when US economies is increasing, the US dollar is increasing, and then our Hong Kong dollars will increase as well. However, in the US economies is downturn, then the USD will be decreasing and our Hong Kong dollar will be decreasing. So our economic condition will be affected by US. This is the exchange rate linked to a key currency. So people will find that linked to key currency is not good. Therefore, some of the country, just like Singapore, they will also link to currency, but they do not link to only one currency. They link to a basket of currency. So this basket of currency, actually the country are their major trading partner. So this is the difference between Hong Kong and Singapore. And for some country, they continue to use the floating rate system, just like US, UK, Australia, and Canada. So their currency actually will have a floating. And then the floating is decided by the demand and supply of the currency. So demand and supply will determine the currency rate. And some of the country, they also use this fixed floating rate system, but they will act together with central bank intervention. Therefore, they will have floating rate system, same as this country. But when the floating rate is too extreme, increase too much or decrease too much, then there we have the government, the central bank. The central bank will intervene by buying and selling to make the floating interest rate become more stable. So this is done by some of the country. And then another one is a kind of currency bot system. This currency bot system is they actually, the money supply currency is backed up by equivalent of the strong currency. So they will also have a look about this currency of some strong currency like USD and Euro, and then they will have a fixed rate. So therefore, they will look at some strong countries' currency, and then they will follow the fixed rate system on that. So there are some countries follow this rule. So here, these two slides just give you some idea, some background information about the exchange rate. So you just learn a little bit about the history and then understand the rationale or the information is enough. You do not need to go into details about the development of the exchange rate system. And then let me give you some elaboration here. So the first term I would like to tell you is called FX rate. So FX, that means foreign exchange. Foreign exchange. So foreign exchange rate, what does it mean, foreign exchange rate? It means the price of a currency expressed in terms of another currency. That means how much foreign currency equal to 1 Hong Kong dollar, or how much of Hong Kong dollars equals to 1 foreign currency. So we will have the exchange rate. So the exchange rate usually will be called in two ways. First is called in direct quotation. We call it direct quotation. So under the direct quotation, our focus is foreign currency. We want to have a look on if I have 1 unit, that means $1 of the foreign currency. For example, if I have $1 of US, how much local currency can I be exchanged for? How much local currency can I be exchanged for? Then in Hong Kong, 1 US is equal to 7.78 Hong Kong dollar. Therefore, direct quotation means how much you need to pay in order to obtain one foreign currency. In order to obtain one foreign currency. This is called direct quotation. So usually in Hong Kong, US dollar or Japan yen, etc., this kind of example is using the direct quotation. Direct quotation. How about indirect quotation? Indirect quotation, that means I have $1 of the domestic currency. How much of the foreign currency I can get using this one Hong Kong dollar. If it is in terms of US, that means 0.128 US equals to 1 Hong Kong dollar. So here, the focus is direct quotation. We focus on how much of our money can exchange for one foreign currency. And then indirect quotation is we have $1 of domestic currency, how much I can exchange for the foreign currency. So in Hong Kong, for RMB, renminbi, it is usually coded in indirect quotation. 咁我哋有兩種唔同嘅方法去表達翻咧嗰個嘅匯率嘅。咁第一個咧就叫做 direct quotation， 咁就係睇翻咧你1蚊嘅外幣可以換幾錢嘅港幣。咁 indirect quotation 就調翻轉啦，1蚊嘅港幣可以換幾多錢嘅外幣。譬如人民幣咧，我哋平日喺香港習慣見到嘅 quotation 嘅方法就係 indirect quotation。例如大概100蚊嘅人民幣可以對85蚊100蚊嘅港幣可以對85蚊嘅人民幣左右啦。咁佢大概會係咁樣表達嘅。So you need to know about what does it mean direct quotation and what does it mean indirect quotation. It also teaches you when we want to translate from a direct quotation to an indirect quotation, you use 1 divided by direct quotation, it equal to indirect quotation. If you want to transfer indirect quotation to direct quotation, then you will 1 over the indirect quotation, it equal to direct quotation. Okay, so this slide just gives you some idea about the foreign exchange rate, about the direct quotation and indirect quotation. And then for the quotation, we have 1 to 7.78 or 0.128 to $1. So this rate, we'll call it the spot rate. Spot rate, that means current rate. Current rate, usually within 2 days of the business day. This way we'll call it the spot rate market. So for a calculation for this module, for this chapter, we will use spot rate market, spot rate market. And for forward market, we have learned it in ACY 4001. You will sign a contract by 2 parties, and then they agree with a specific foreign currency rate, and then to be settled in future day. This future day must be more than 2 business cycle. That is a forward market. 我哋有現貨市場同埋有期貨市場嘅，咁期貨市場就係咧大家 lock 定咗個 exchange rate， 將來 settle at 某一個價，嗰個係 forward market。咁如果我哋呢一課咧，我哋主要咧就會睇翻現貨市場嗰個嘅匯率。Okay, so let's recap what we have just learned. We have just go through about the originally exchange rate system before and after 1974, and some of the country they will use different monetary system. And then we introduce to you about foreign exchange rate and also the direct quotation, indirect quotation, and we have let you have the idea about what is spot rate market and also what is forward market. Okay, let's continue. So what does it mean, foreign exchange exposure? When I say that the company has foreign exchange exposure, that means the company's operating cash flow or their financial statement will be affected by the change in foreign exchange rate. Why the foreign exchange rate change? There will be effect on their cash flow and also in their financial statement. It is because they may sell the goods in overseas market and then they receive foreign currency, or they import inputs from the other country and then they need to pay foreign currency. Or simply, they are the foreign subsidiaries. They have the parent company that located in different country of them. Therefore, in this case, you have a chance to touch with the foreign exchange. And then once you touch the foreign exchange, when there is change in the exchange rate, you will suffer the foreign exchange exposure, because the goes up and down of the foreign exchange rate finally will affect your financial statement and affect your operating cash flow. Then we will say that this company is having a foreign exchange exposure. Foreign exchange rate exposure 嘅意思就係只要你有外幣嘅買賣， 嘅來往嘅生意嘅話咧，咁你就會有機會因為外幣嘅改變而影響咗你公司嘅 cash flow 啦，或者影響個 financial statement。咁呢個包括可能你喺 overseas market 度賣嘢啦，喺 overseas market 度買貨翻嚟啦，又或者本身你係一間咧處於同 parent 唔同地方嘅外國嘅子公司，咁我哋就會有機會咧要用上呢一個 foreign exchange rate 啦，因為有 foreign exchange currency。Okay, so then we will say that there is a foreign exchange exposure. And for foreign exchange exposure, we will divide them into two types. One is called accounting exposure. The other is called operating exposure. As mentioned before, we will just focus on the accounting exposure. So what does it mean, accounting exposure under foreign exchange exposure? It means that it will have the impact of the report earnings and also the statement of financial statement. That means we will study the effect it will hit the financial statement. This is called accounting exposure. For operating exposure, we are talking about whether the exchange rate change, we will have competitive advantage or competitive position with other companies. So this is not directly related to accounting. Therefore, we will ignore the operating exposure. We'll only focus on when the company use foreign exchange, they will suffer foreign exchange exposure. And one of the foreign exchange exposure is called accounting exposure. And for accounting exposure, we'll study about the impact on the earnings and also impact on the statement of financial position. Okay, remember for operating exposure, we'll ignore it because it is talking about the purchasing power parity. Whether the exchange rate change, it will restrict your purchasing power or not. So we will ignore this. Okay, so we have just go through a slide that talking about foreign exchange exposure. When the company has using the foreign currency to buy or to sell things, finally it will need to settle the amount in foreign exchange. Then we will suffer the foreign exchange exposure because of the changes of the exchange rate. And then for this foreign exchange exposure, we divided them into accounting exposure and operating exposure, and we will ignore the operating exposure. And for the accounting exposure, actually we will divide the accounting exposure into two ways. The first is called transaction exposure. The second is called translation exposure. So what is the difference between transaction exposure and translation exposure? So transaction exposure, that means the company has entered into a foreign currency transaction. For example, you purchase from Japan or you sell to Japan. Finally, you need to settle the amount in Japan yen, or you will receive the Japan yen as the settlement. In this case, we will focus that this foreign currency is because a transaction happened, and then you need to settle the amount in foreign currency. So we will call that this is a transaction exposure. And this transaction exposure, that means you need to pay in foreign currency or receive in foreign currency. Therefore, it will affect the cash inflow or affect the cash outflow. So remember, transaction exposure is a kind of accounting exposure, and this represents you enter into a foreign currency transaction. And once you enter into the foreign currency transaction, you have the right to receive money or you have the obligation to pay the money. Therefore, finally, the change in the exchange rate will also affect your cash flow. It will affect your cash flow. Unlike translation exposure. So translation exposure, that means you are a foreign operation. You are situated in the location that differs from your parent company. Your parent company will do their financial statement, their operation themselves, and you having it in your own country, you will also perform your services and then do your daily business. However, at year-end day, you need to submit your financial statement to the holding company for them to prepare the consolidated financial statement. When you prepare the consolidated financial statement, submit your financial statement for them to prepare the consolidated financial statement, you need to have the same currency with them. For example, if you are a Hong Kong company, your mother company is in Singapore. Therefore, at the end of the year, you need to present a Hong Kong financial statement on your website to let the Hong Kong people know about the performance of their company. However, on the other way around, you also need to submit your financial statement in terms of Singapore dollar to your holding company, because your holding company need to prepare the consolidation using your financial statement. In that case, you need to do a retranslation. Translate your Hong Kong dollar financial statement into Singapore dollars financial statement in order to report it in the consolidated financial statement. In that way, we will call that transaction difference, the exchange rate difference, actually is aroused because of translation exposure. It does not relate to individual transaction. It relates to the whole group because the subsidiaries need to report to the holding company. They need to translate their financial statement from their own currency into the presentation currency of the holding company. If it is that way, we will call this translation exposure. Translation exposure. Okay, so transaction exposure, actually it happened in individual company, while translation exposure, it happened for group company only. If you do not have group company, you are just an individual company, you do not have the problem of translation exposure because you do not need to submit your financial statement to the holding company for them to do the consolidation. Okay, so understand the difference between transaction exposure and translation exposure. And remember, translation exposure, because you need to consistent with the holding companies to report in the consolidated financial statement. Therefore, you translate it, and this does not affect the cash flow. This does not relate to cash in or cash out. It will not have the effect here. So here, remember, for transaction exposure, it is arise from the foreign currency transaction. And then it will only affect the individual financial statement of a single company. If you are a single company and then you do a transaction in other currency, you will suffer from transaction exposure. For example, you receive money in foreign currency or you pay money in foreign currency. You may have the accounts receivable, you may have the accounts payable in foreign currency. This is called accounting exposure. And for translation exposure, because you are a foreign subsidiaries, finally, you need to report in group level. You need to prepare the financial statement the same as the holding company. Therefore, we do some translation, and then we have finally suffer the translation gain or loss due to the movement of the exchange rate. This is called translation exposure. 咁請你好好咁記住咯喎，accounting exposure 入邊，我哋會有 transaction exposure 同埋呢一個叫做 translation exposure。transaction exposure 咧，其實就係針對翻一啲 individual 嘅公司，佢哋個人嘅公司，因為佢哋咧有一啲嘅交易係同一啲外國嘅公司去做嘅，咁可能外國嘅公司要求佢找呢一個嘅外幣啦，又或者佢賣嘢去外地，咁要求咧係要找人哋收翻，人哋係俾外幣你嘅，咁有呢啲情況咧，嗰個嘅交易所產生出嚟嘅影響咧，我哋就叫做 transaction exposure。但係如果咧你本身係一個 individual company， 你冇 group company 呢一個包袱喺度嘅話咧，基本上你就唔會遇上一個叫做 translation exposure 啦。但係如果你係一間海外嘅子公司嘅話咧，你就會遇上 translation exposure 呢個難題啦。因為咧你自己用翻你自己嗰個嘅currency 去入數之後咧，然後你要交翻一份數俾你嘅 mother company， 咁你嘅 mother company 咧一定有佢自己要 report 嘅嗰個 currency 嘅。如果佢喺海外，譬如先頭先example新加坡，咁你要交一份數過去咧，就俾佢喺新加坡嗰邊做 consolidation。嘅，咁所以你要將你由本地嗰份 financial statement 轉成新加坡嘅嗰個貨幣嘅，咁喺運算嘅過程入邊會衍生一啲 translation gain or loss 嘅，咁呢啲時候我哋就叫做 translation exposure， 咁只會發生喺一個子公司而個子公司同母公司本身係唔同地點存在嘅，先至有呢一個 translation exposure 嘅。Okay, so understand clearly about the difference between this transaction exposure and translation exposure. One is from the angle of the individual financial statement booked. One is from the angle of the foreign enterprise, because you are the you have the foreign operation. Therefore, you need to submit the financial statement for your holding company. Okay, any questions about this transaction exposure and translation exposure? Okay, if no, let's continue. So we have get some idea about the management system, about the monetary system. We have some idea about that if you enter into a foreign transactions, you have the foreign exchange exposure. And for the foreign exchange exposure, we focus on the accounting exposure. Apart from the accounting exposure, you need to determine whether this is transaction gain or loss is due to transaction exposure or translation exposure. Okay, you get some idea about that. Let's continue. Move on to the next slide. So we're talking about the functional currency. So first of all, let me give you some definition here. Let's have some definition here. The first definition is called foreign operation. So foreign operation here means that you are the reporting entity. Reporting entity, that means you need to submit the financial statement for reporting. That means you are the holding company. Okay, so you are the reporting entity, you are that entity, and you are the reporting entity, you have the subsidiaries, you may have the associate, you may have the joint arrangement, or you may have the branch. And then these subsidiaries, associate, joint arrangement, or the branch, their operation is conducted in a country that other than this holding company, or their currency is other than this reporting entity. Then we will call the subsidiaries, associate, and joint arrangement or the branch as a foreign operation. Foreign operation 嘅意思就係你同母公司嗰個經營業務嘅國家同埋所用嘅 currency 係唔同嘅，咁呢個就你自己嘅身份就稱之為一個 foreign operation. So you may be the subsidiaries, you may be the associate, you may be the branch, you may be the joint arrangement. You are operate in the country that different from the reporting entity. That means different from the holding company. You use different currency because you're located in different country. Then we will say that you are the foreign operation. Okay, next term I would like to let you know is called local currency. So what does it mean, local currency? The country you operate and then their currency is using, that is the local currency. So local currency is say that the currency of the country in which the foreign entity operate. So for example, if you operate in Hong Kong, then Hong Kong dollar is the local currency. If you operate in Japan, then Japan yen is the local currency. If you are the company that operate in Singapore, then the local currency is SGD. Okay, so local currency is not that difficult to understand. It just refers to the country you are operate. You operate at there, then the currency of that country will become the local currency. So you have no choice on the local currency. It just you have choice to determine which country you are going to operate. Once you operate there, you do not have the choice of the local currency. The local currency is the same as the place you operate. 咁記住啦 ，local currency 你係冇得揀嘅，咁就睇翻你喺邊度經營，當地嘅貨幣就稱之為 local currency 啦。So you have choice on functional currency. As I just mentioned to you, you do not have the choice of the local currency. You only have the choice to choose which place you are going to operate, and then that place you use the currency you call local currency. However, functional currency, you have the right to choose. Functional currency, it reflects that your primary economic environment. That means where you operate, where is your main operation? Where is your main operation? So I think that if I operate in Hong Kong, local currency is Hong Kong dollar. However, my main business actually is to trade with Japan. I purchase from Japan. I sell it to Japan. Most of the currency or most of the transaction I use is Japan yen. Then even though you are located in Hong Kong, you can choose Japan yen as your functional currency. So functional currency, that means it can reflect your daily operation. It can reflect your daily operation. And later on in next slide, we'll teach you how to choose functional currency. So now you just get the idea. Functional currency is your daily business, your primary economic environment, where your entity operate. You operate here. So sometimes local currency can be same as functional currency, but sometimes functional currency may not be same as local currency. Remember, local currency you have no choice, but functional currency you have the choice. Local currency 冇得揀嘅，嗰個地方喺邊度，咁嗰個地方個 currency 就係佢嘅 local currency 啦。但係 functional currency 有得揀嘅 ，functional currency 咧就係你自己決定翻你嘅業務日常咧，其實你想用咩帳目去代表啊？你嗰出街嘅數，或者係你擺上網嘅嗰份數嗰份嘅financial statement， 你想嗰份 financial statement 你入落去個 software 度平時做數嘅 prepare 啲 financial statement， 你想用咩 currency？ 咁就要取決翻你平日嘅業務啦。如果你平日嘅業務絕大部分都係同日本來往嘅，買賣都係同佢哋嘅絕大部分都係嘅，咁你可以揀Japan yen as 你嗰個嘅functional currency 嘅。咁 functional currency 有得揀，未必一定等於 local currency. Okay, so this is you have the choice on the functional currency. Depends on different factors. You will choose it as your functional currency. And then the next item I would like to introduce to you is called foreign currency. So foreign currency and functional currency, you need to read it together. When a company choose the functional currency, say if you choose Hong Kong dollar as the functional currency, then all other currency is called foreign currency. If you choose Japan, if your local currency is Hong Kong, you operate in Hong Kong, but you choose functional currency as Japan yen, then Hong Kong dollar is your foreign currency, because from the angle of functional currency, those currency that is not functional currency, it become foreign currency. So I say that once functional currency is determined, all others are foreign currency. Foreign currency 嘅意思就係有別於 functional currency 嘅嗰啲就叫做有別於 functional currency 嗰啲咧就叫做 foreign currency 啦。如果你嘅 functional currency 係港幣，港幣以外嘅就係 foreign currency。如果你個 functional currency 係新加坡紙，咁新加坡紙以外嘅嘢就係 foreign currency 啦。Therefore, if your local currency is equal to your functional currency, then other than that will be foreign currency. If your local currency is Hong Kong dollar, functional currency is Japan yen, then Hong Kong dollar will become your foreign currency. 咁如果港幣係local currency，你揀嘅 functional currency 係 yen 嘅話咧，咁港幣咧就會變成咗 foreign currency 㗎啦。Okay, so any questions about local currency, functional currency, and foreign currency? Local currency, let me remind you again, you have no choice. It depends on where you operate. Functional currency, you have choice. You have choice. You can depends on what is your primary economic environment. Foreign currency, once you choose the functional currency, the other will automatically become the foreign currency. So finally, is presentation currency. Presentation currency, that means you present the financial statement. For example, if you are at a group company, you need to submit the financial statement to your parent company to prepare the consolidation. And then your presentation currency should be same as your mother company, same as your parent company. Presentation currency 咧，通常就跟母公司嘅，我哋針對翻就係一個集團公司入邊咧，通常大家都要你喺香港經營，你嘅 local currency 係港幣，你日常嘅業務係港幣，所以你嘅 functional currency 係港幣。間唔中買下嘢現外幣嘅，間唔中買下啲美國嘢嚇，少少買啲產品翻嚟，咁你咧就會有美金做呢一個 foreign currency 啦。咁至於你嘅 presentation currency， 如果你嘅母公司係喺新加坡嘅話咧，咁你最終要做翻一盤數咧係現新加坡紙俾佢做 consol 咧，咁嗰個咧就叫做 presentation currency. Therefore, you also have no choice in the presentation currency. The presentation currency usually is decided by the holding company because they require you to present the financial statement same as them. Therefore, that is the presentation currency, and you have no choice. The only one you have choice is called functional currency. So hope that this explanation will now have the concept about functional currency, foreign currency, local currency, and presentation currency. This four idea is really very important because in the coming questions, we will give you the information about the local currency, functional currency, foreign currency, and presentation currency of the company. And then you need to decide how to translate it. If you cannot identify this different currency, you are not able to identify which method you are going to use. So bear in mind on, you need to fully understand what does it mean, local currency, functional currency, foreign currency, and also presentation currency. If you have any questions right now, you can let me know before we carry on. 咁要認識呢幾個 currency 非常之重要，因為如果你唔認得佢哋咧，你得到條題目咧，你都唔會識做嘅。Okay, so if no, let's continue. So finally, I would like to introduce a word to you that is called closing rate. So when we study the IAS 21, the International Accounting Standard 21, that about the foreign exchange rate, you must need to know this method, this rate. This is called closing rate. Closing rate, that means year-end rate, year-end rate. And then in individual transaction or when we in the transaction exposure or translation exposure, we also will use this closing rate. So you need to know what does it mean closing rate. Closing rate, that means year-end day spot rate. Year-end day spot rate 喺年結嗰一日嘅貨幣市場入邊嘅現價，貨幣市場入邊嘅現價，咁就係 year-end day 嗰日嘅價啦。So this is the closing rate. Okay, so remember, closing rate is the spot exchange rate at the end of the reporting period. So now you understand all these definitions. Let's continue. So let me give you the idea about how to choose the functional currency. So according to the IAS 21, it say that when you think about functional currency, you can think about your primary economic environment you operate. For example, if you operate in Hong Kong, then you will use Hong Kong dollar. If you operate in Japan, you usually use Japan dollar. So this is one of the criteria to think about that. And then it say that a firm's primary economic environment is not determined by national or political boundary. So here is so-called primary economic environment. It's not just the place you operate. You need to think about the details. What does it mean, the details? You need to think about if there is any influence your selling price. So I want to set the selling price in Hong Kong dollar, but I was not able to do so because of some reason. I need to set the selling price in other currency, or your selling price should be denominated or settled in other currency. So let me give you an example to think about why your sales price will be influenced, why your sales price should be denominated or settled in some of the currency. So here is an example. There is a company called NOL. So this NOL company, its revenue is mainly in form of freight charge. So they are doing the transportation company. Where do they locate? This company is located in Singapore. So when they're located in Singapore, the local currency should be the Singapore dollar. And then this company need to think about their functional currency. Okay, so they think about their functional currency. What is their business? Their business is to transport the goods and then earn the freight charge. So what are they going to transfer? They are transferring fuel oil. They are ship the fuel oil. So what will be fuel oil? Fuel oil usually will be denominated in US dollar. Therefore, when people buy the oil and then using US dollar as the selling price, they will also ask this NOL to transfer the fuel oil for them, but they usually will at the same time settle in US dollar because the US dollar is for the fuel oil price. Therefore, for the transportation, they will also base on the fuel oil to make the charge. At this moment, this NOL, although located in Singapore, but their selling price is influenced by the transfer of fuel oil. Therefore, the sales price is not usually denominated and settled in US dollar. 咁因為呢間公司咧，佢係做嗰個嘅運送原油嘅。咁啲原油咧，我哋知道啦，喺世界各地嘅原油全部都係以美金定價嘅。咁所以買原油嘅嗰個人咧，就會用美金去定價，美金去 settle 啦。咁同時間咧，你去運送啲油嘅時候，可能都會係咧每幾多錢嘅原油價格上落，咁可能你個運費都會貴啲啊，或者各樣，你會有唔同嘅原因去定價嘅。咁你嗰個定價咧，通常都會跟翻人哋啦，人哋本身賣嗰樣產品都係 pay 美金嘅，咁所以你個運費咧好多時咧都係叫佢哋 settle in 美金，你都係會收美金嘅。咁所以你咧雖然係一間新加坡公司，但係因為你做嘅業務最終會影響咗你嘅 selling price， 或者你嘅 selling price 會跟隨住油價，都係用US dollar 嚟做denominate 個 price 嘅，咁所以咧最終咧你就唔係因為你嘅 political boundary， 唔係因為你喺新加坡境內，你就一定要用新加坡 dollars 做你嘅 functional currency 啦。呢個咧就會參考翻你嘅主要業務同埋嗰個主要業務嗰個售價係點樣釐定咧，而決定你嘅 functional currency 啦。So under this case, NOL, because the daily business is to transfer of fuel oil and fuel oil is denominated in US dollar. Finally, they will also charge the shipping expenses in terms of US dollar. And most of the transactions are actually denominated in US dollar. Therefore, they decide to use US dollar as their functional currency to record in their transaction. Okay, understand how to determine the functional currency, right? And then under the IAS 21, there is a paragraph 9 to 10. They ask you to think about these 5 indicators before you want to make up your mind to choose what is your functional currency. So how do they tell you to choose it? First of all, you need to think about the first criteria, the currency that mainly influence the sales price of goods and services. So your daily business actually is focused on sales. Why you carry out the business? Because you want to make the sales. Therefore, you need to think about whether your selling price is influenced by which company or by which country or by which exchange rate. Then you will determine the functional currency. Depends on the sales price, how you determine the sales price. Just like the L, they will usually charge in US dollar because they transport for the fuel oil, while fuel oil is denominated in US. So their currency that influence the sales price will be US dollar. Then they will choose US dollar as their functional currency. Secondly, you may think about any regulation if you want to trade with some country, maybe they have some regulation, you must settle in that kinds of currency. If there is some regulation like that, you need to follow the regulation to determine your functional currency. Thirdly is if you do not have any idea about or any effect on the selling price, or you do not have any restrictions or regulation, you can determine your functional currency to see that whether your neighbor salary, whether you purchase the material or whether you purchase from other suppliers, whether all this cost of goods is denominated in which currency, then you can determine your functional currency. 咁你可以從你嘅 selling price 着手去諗下你嘅 functional currency 啦，又或者從你嗰啲嘅經營嘅國家嘅地方，佢有冇一啲限制你一定要 determine 某一個 selling price 做 currency 啦。最後就係睇翻咧，你通常買貨啊、入貨啊嗰方面咧，你喺邊度咁而決定個 currency 嘅。So we will say that the first three indicator is the primary indicator. Usually the company will think about these three factors to determine their functional currency. If they have difficulty, then they will consider indicator 4 and 5, but this seldom happen. Item 4 is currency in which financing is obtained. Item 5 is the currency in which receipt of operating activity, where you receive the operating activity. So this two is where use this indicator. Instead, we'll usually use the first one. Inference of the sales price. Okay, so this is under IAS 21 to teach you how to choose functional currency. Okay, any questions regarding how to choose this functional currency? So here it tells you that when we think about functional currency, you need to consider all the factors taken into the consideration. You need to exercise the judgment very carefully. Why? Because once you determine the functional currency, it is usually not allowed you to change the functional currency unless you have strong and reasonable evidence behind that can support you. Otherwise, we will not choose the functional currency very easy. 咁通常 functional currency 咧，作為一間公司咧，揀咗佢哋就盡量唔轉㗎啦，因為一轉咧，你過往嗰啲 competitive figures 咧就要轉埋，咁就會非常之複雜嘅。咁所以咧，佢就會提你啦，你要考慮清楚先好決定你嘅 functional currency。咁如果一般喺香港經營嘅公司咧，除非好特別嘅原因啦，其實佢哋大部分咧都係用翻 local currency， 即係康康多啦，作為佢哋日常帳目上邊咧所入數嘅。咁嗰個 functional currency 就係你日常嘅帳目上面入數咧，究竟係點樣去 handle， 點樣去處理啦。Okay, understand about the functional currency, right? So how to think about your functional currency? Usually, if you are a foreign operation, you will think about your functional currency using first, you will think about the local currency. Or if you do not want to use local currency, you will think about the parent's functional currency, because usually parent's functional currency will be parent's presentation currency. And then you also need to present your financial statement to the parent. Therefore, you can follow their functional currency as your functional currency. 咁通常一啲外國嘅喺國外喺唔同地方嘅子公司咧，佢哋會點樣揀自己嘅 functional currency 咧？通常兩個選擇啦。一係就跟翻自己嘅所在地啦，我喺邊度經營，我就用邊度嘅貨幣作為我嘅 functional currency 啦。另一款就係跟母公司啦，跟母公司有個好處嘅，因為跟完佢之後咧，最終我都要 present 盤數俾佢，我 present 俾佢嘅時候咧，都係跟翻佢 currency， 咁就最理想啦。是但一款，一係 local currency。一係functional parent 嘅 functional currency， 咁我哋就唔會用第三款 currency 㗎。陣間我會俾個例子你。如果我哋用第三款 currency 嘅話咧，我哋做 translation 咧就好困難㗎啦。So we usually think of these two kinds of currency, or otherwise, if you choose a third currency as your functional currency, it will become more complicated, and I will illustrate this complicated situation to you in the latest slide. Okay, so we have focused on how to choose functional currency. We have let you know what does it mean local currency, functional currency, presentation currency, and foreign currency, right? Okay, now let me tell you about how to handle this so-called different currency. So instead of talking to you about the translation exposure, can I skip some slide first, and then I will go back again later. So let's move directly to slide 25 first. 咁咧有咗呢個概念之後咧，我想教咗一樣簡單啲嘅嘢先。咁嗰個簡單啲嘅嘢咧，就係咧從一個 individual 嘅角度，從一個 individual 嘅角度咧，去諗一諗嗰個嘅currency transaction 應該係點嘅。individual company level，我哋就唔諗一個 console 嘅 level 住。OK，so this is foreign currency transaction at a standalone entity. Okay, so let's have a look. So here we are talking about the transaction exposure. So transaction exposure, that means we are focused on individual entity. As I just tell you that we are focused on the standalone entity. Standalone entity, that means individual company, they do not have the group. They are the individual company, right? So we are talking about the transaction exposure. Transaction exposure is arise from the foreign currency transaction. Because you have a foreign currency transaction, then it arises from the transaction exposure. It will affect the individual financial statement. So now we are looking from the individual financial statement first. Transaction exposure arise from foreign currency transactions, and then it will affect individual book. It will affect individual book. Okay, so let's have a look for the individual financials as individual financial statement. With how will it be affected? So let's talk about the transaction exposure. So here, let me give you the timeline, and then to have a look on that. So first of all, foreign currency transactions. So assume that we purchase inventory from foreign country. Assume that I buy the inventory from foreign country, and then this is a foreign currency transaction. When I buy the inventory and then I pay it later, I will debit inventory and then credit AP, debit inventory and then credit AP, accounts payable. So when I enter into this transaction, this will give a rise to the monetary liability. The liability is payable. Why accounts payable is a monetary liability? Monetary here, that means you need to pay the money. So this liability represents that you need to pay the money. Therefore, all the payable accounts payable, salary payable, interest payable, etc., notes payable or loan payable, all this payable is a kind of liability. And this liability, you need to settle it using the money. So this is called monetary liability. And all the receivable, we'll call it monetary asset. All the receivable, we'll call it monetary asset. Asset that is receivable, monetary, that means it related to money. It related to money. So foreign currency transaction record here, it will give rise to a monetary asset or monetary liability. You will debit inventory, credit cash, or debit inventory, credit accounts payable. And then on the transaction day, what is the exchange rate you are going to use? If you purchase from US, you need to pay US dollar, then you will use the exchange rate that happened for the transaction. We call it the actual rate on that day, or we call it the historical rate. So historical rate, that means the transaction day taken, the transaction taken day, that is actual rate or historical rate. So therefore, when there is foreign currency transaction, we will record once. We record once on the date of the transaction using the actual rate or historical rate. And then at the year-end day, if you have not yet settled the liability, the accounts payable is still there. According to the IAS 21, when you take care about the transaction exposure, you need to retranslate this monetary asset or monetary liability again at the year-end day. At the year-end day, using closing rate. That means using the year-end day rate to do a retranslation only on the monetary asset and the monetary liability. That means in this case, when you debit inventory, credit accounts payable, the inventory, you do not need to do any retranslation. But the accounts payable, it is a monetary liability. You need to do a retranslation. Later on, if you settle it, for example, you purchase on October and then year-end day is December, now it's February the next year. You settle on February. Then on the settlement day, according to the accounting standard, you need to retranslate it again on the settlement day. Therefore, for the transaction, you need to go through 3 stages. And when you come across this three stage, you need to do first transaction using actual rate, historical rate. Second, financial year using a year-end day rate. Settlement using settlement day rate to do this. So this is about the typical foreign currency transaction. So let's look at detail. We have mentioned about monetary asset and monetary liability. So before going further, let me tell you what is the difference between monetary and non-monetary. So monetary here, that means it related to money. It related to money. You have the right to receive, or you have the obligation to deliver the amount, and the amount is fixed or determinable by number of unit of currency. For example, you purchase some inventory and then the amount is 100 US dollar. Then what that 100 US dollar is the fixed amount, Only the amount will be changed because of the change of the exchange rate. But the US dollar is already a fixed amount, so it is a fixed or determined number of unit of currency. Then we'll call it monetary item. So let me give you some items here. Monetary assets and monetary liability. Cash or any cash you deposit into the bank, this is an asset, and this asset is directly related to cash. So cash and time deposit in the bank is monetary asset. How about receivables? All the receivables, accounts receivable, you have the right to receive the money. Loan receivable, you have the right to receive the money. And then the amount you are going to receive is fixed. You already know that how much is the amount, right? Because when you enter into the transaction, you know about the accounts receivable, you all know about the loan receivable, and then you know the amount you are going to receive. Therefore, all the receivable is monetary asset. Same as payable. All the payable, when you enter into the transaction or enter into the contract, you know how much amount you are going to pay. You have the obligation to deliver the fixed amount. Then this is called monetary liability. So monetary assets and monetary liability usually refer to all the receivable, all the payable, all the cash, and different kinds of cash deposit in the bank. How about non-monetary assets? So for non-monetary assets, that means we give you some example here, like investment in equity instrument. If you invest in a company's share capital, we have learned that in ACY 4001, you invest less than 20%, then that part is called your investment in equity instrument. If you still remember the investment in equity instrument, if it is a trading investment, then you will measure fair value through P&L. If it is a non-trading investment, you will measure at fair value through other comprehensive income. So this investment is a non-monetary item. Why it is a non-monetary item? Because when you buy the investment, you will debit investment and then credit cash. You know how much amount you're going to pay. However, when you carry on the investment amount will be go ups and down, and finally when you sell it, you do not know exact amount. The amount is not fixed. It depends on the fair value on the day you sell it. Therefore, this investment is an asset, but it is not monetary asset. It is a non-monetary asset. You are not able to tell out the cost. And for PPE, intangible asset and inventory as well, you purchase the PPE, you purchase the intangible asset for the company to use, and then this PPE and intangible asset can help you to generate the profit. You never know how much profit they will able to generate for you. You're just able to know how much you buy for the PPE, how much you buy for the intangible asset. But using this PPE, using this intangible asset to carry out the business, finally you receive some income because you have good fixed asset there, and then people come to your shop and then buy the fixed asset, buy the goods. But you never know how much they will pay, right? Therefore, you cannot estimate how much income will be generated by your PPE, generated by your intangible asset. The amount is not fixed. Therefore, they are not monetary item. They are non-monetary item. Same as inventory. Inventory, you do not know finally how much you are able to sell. If no one likes your inventory, you need to reduce the price. Therefore, the amount is not fixed. You do not know about the how much amount they pay for the inventory. Therefore, for PPE, intangible asset, and inventory, we will say that they are non-monetary item measured at cost. And finally, the unearned revenue or prepaid expenses. Unearned revenue, that means someone pay you the revenue first, but you have not yet performed the services. As the time passes by, you will receive nothing. You just need to perform the services in order to earn the revenue. Therefore, unearned revenue is a non-monetary item. Prepaid expenses is also you pay the expenses first, but this prepaid expenses finally will be utilized as the time pass by, you use the services, then it will become expenses. Therefore, prepaid expenses is also not a monetary item. So to summarize, monetary item, that means all the payable or the receivable. Same as the non-refundable deposit, it is also a non-monetary item. Okay, so understand the concept of monetary item and non-monetary item. Do you have any questions regarding this slide? Okay, let's continue. So once we have determined whether it is monetary or non-monetary, then what should we do? So it say that when there is a foreign currency transaction happen, that means in this diagram, if it happened a foreign currency transaction, you purchase of inventory from foreign country, then what should you do? You will debit inventory and credit AP on that date using the actual spot rate. This actual spot rate have another name called historical rate. You can call it actual rate or you can call it historical rate, right? When there is a transaction, you do debit inventory, credit AP. As the time passed by, now is year-end day. Now is year-end day, and this monetary liability have not yet settled. According to the accounting standard, at subsequent day, if you find that the monetary item that is a foreign currency transaction that have not yet been settled, then this AP, you need to adjust the amount using closing rate method. Using closing rate, that means your year-end day rate to retranslate it again. Later on, I will give you an example and then you will know how to do that. This is called the monetary item, AP. You need to retranslate again. How about inventory? Inventory here, it is a non-monetary item measured at cost. And then it tells that non-monetary item measured at historical cost, just like this inventory, no adjustment is needed. You do not need to do any adjustment. Just keep it as the date of transaction. Keep it as historical rate. It will be fine. Then we'll call this non-monetary item measured at historical cost. No need to do anything at the balance sheet date. How about non-monetary item measured at fair value? Remember, we have investment in equity instrument. This investment in equity instrument, although they are non-monetary item, although they do not need to retranslate it again, but remember, at every year-end day, we need to find out the market value. We need to find out the fair value because they are calling the fair value through P&L or fair value through other comprehensive income. Therefore, for this kinds of non-monetary item measured at fair value, just like the investment, according to the standard, because they are measured at fair value. Therefore, at year-end day, we need to use the year-end exchange rate to update their fair value, to existing exchange rate. Therefore, in this way, we will say that it seems non-monetary item at fair value also you need to use the closing rate at year-end day. So bear in mind, monetary item, non-monetary item measured at fair value, we also need to use a closing rate to recalculate it again at the balance sheet day. But it is not for non-monetary item measured at historical cost. 咁即係話咧，如果佢係界定為monetary item 咧喺 year-end day 如果未 settle 嘅，我哋要再揾 year-end day 嘅 closing rate 幫佢 retranslate 一次，因為佢係一個 foreign currency transaction。如果佢係 non-monetary item at historical cost 咧，即係 inventory 咧就唔使啦。如果佢係 non-monetary item 但係 measure at fair value 咧，因為 fair value 嘅 concept 咧就係 year-end day 會揾翻佢嘅 fair value。year-end day 揾翻佢嘅 fair value 咧，亦都要揾翻 year-end day 嘅closing rate 去做翻嘅。咁所以咧，基本上咧，原來 monetary item 同埋 non-monetary item measure at fair value 咧喺 balance sheet day 咧都要 retranslate 一次。一個要 retranslate 嘅原因係因為佢係 monetary item， 另一個要還 retranslate 嘅原因係因為佢係 fair value。佢係 fair value， 唔係因為佢係 monetary item， 佢唔係 monetary item， 但係因為佢係 stay at fair value。咁由於係 stay at fair value 咧，佢就要喺 year-end day 揾翻佢嘅 fair value。咁所以咧就要順便揾埋佢係 year-end day 嘅 exchange rate 幫佢 translate 一次啦。Therefore, you need to bear in mind for individual transactions, monetary item which you retranslate again at year-end day, non-monetary item which you need to retranslate also at the year-end day. Okay, so understand about the individual transaction and how to do that, right? Okay, so let me give you some further idea. So assume that I have a monetary item or I have a non-monetary item carry at fair value. Remember, apart from the transaction day, We need to do that using the actual spot way. We also need to remeasurement at balance sheet day and remeasure at settlement day. Remeasure at balance sheet day and remeasure at settlement day. When you compare the spot way with the year-end day way, when you compare the year-end day way with the settlement day, finally, the exchange rate difference will give rise to exchange gain or loss. Let me give you an example. Assume that I have the right to receive money. I have an accounts receivable, and this accounts receivable is $100 US dollar. So you have entered into the US dollar here, and this US dollar transaction is 100 US. You have the right to receive 100 US dollar, and then at that day, at transaction day, the currency exchange rate is 1 to 7.8. 1 to 7.8. Then you will mark in your financial statement, I have the right to receive $780. That is, you have an asset. However, because you are holding the right to receive this US dollar, finally, this foreign currency, that means US dollar, this US dollar depreciate. This US dollar depreciate from 7.8 to 7.7. That means here you only can receive $770 of Hong Kong dollar when the company settle the amount for you. In this case, you will lose $10. That $10 is called the exchange loss. Exchange loss. However, if it is the other way around, you have the right to receive 100 US dollar. And this 100 US dollar, finally, at the year-end date, the exchange rate of US is decreasing. And then now you can exchange for 1 to 7.9. Then the amount you receive of this 100 US dollar will be in terms of Hong Kong dollar of $790. So when the foreign currency appreciate, when the US appreciate, you are holding US, then you will have a exchange gain here. 咁就要睇翻你 hold 咩啦？你 hold 住100蚊嘅美金，如果美金跌嘅話咧，咁你換算翻港紙咧就會細咗啦，所以你有個 loss。如果你 hold 住100蚊美金嘅 AR， 但係美金強嘅話咧，你 hold 住美金咧，咁結果你就會收多啲嘅港紙，所以你就會有個 gain 喺度啦。Debt instrument 啱啦 ，debt instrument 都要睇翻啦。如果個 debt instrument 我哋要睇翻佢係乜嘢 nature 嘅，咁佢應該都係一個 monetary liability 嘅，冇錯。Okay, so this is about the transaction exposure. We have a look into that about the non-monetary item carry at fair value and also monetary item. Remember, we need to retranslate it again at balance sheet day and also at settlement day. Okay, so let me remind you again. Remember, for the transaction gain or loss, because we translate using the spot way and then using the balance sheet day rates and then using the settlement day, there will be increase or decrease of the exchange rate, and then we will suffer gain or loss. And this transaction gain or loss, if it is related to monetary item, this is we will record it in the profit and loss. We'll record it in the profit and loss. We will compare the spot rate with the reporting day rates and also with the settlement day. If there is any increase or decrease, we'll record this exchange gain or loss in P&L. Okay. How about non-monetary item carry at fair value? Remember, non-monetary item carry at fair value, we also need to retranslate it again when the fair value was determined. Then when we translate it again, it comes out about the exchange gain or loss. What should be this exchange gain or loss put into? It depends. So it says that non-monetary item carry at fair value, actually the calculation is the same way with the monetary item. However, if your equity investment is non-trading equity investment, that means it determined by fair value through other comprehensive income, then the exchange gain or loss arising from fair value through other comprehensive income, their gain or loss in the exchange gain will be recognized in other comprehensive income as well. For the trading equity investment, because we are fair value through P&L, then the transaction gain or loss will be recognized in income. 咁都係因應翻對號入座嘅。我哋喺學嗰個嘅 trading equity 同 non-trading equity investment 嘅時候咧，已經話俾你聽啦。因為你要揾 fair value，每次嘅 fair value increase decrease 咧，如果係 non-trading 咧係假帳嚟嘅，咁我哋就將佢擠落去 other comprehensive income 度。如果係 for trading 嘅話咧，其實你只係咧提早去 record 嗰個 income 嘅啫，咁所以佢衍生出嚟嘅 fair value gain 咧就會擺落 income statement。咁 咁同樣地啦，跟翻對號入座。如果佢係 other comprehensive income，佢嘅 transaction gain or loss 要翻 other comprehensive income。如果係 through P&L 嘅，佢嘅 transaction gain or loss 都係 through P&L 嘅，咁就對應翻咁做就得啦。And for monetary item, all the exchange gain or loss will be recorded in P&L immediately. Okay, so we have go through about the transactions exposure, and then you understand how to determine the spot date rate, that is actual rate, closing rate, and also settlement date rate. While you determine the rate, you will calculate the gain or loss. So now let me give you an exercise, and then you will know how does it means. So let's look at illustration 1. So illustration 1 here, there are 2 transactions. These ACE corporations whose functional currency is DC. So their functional currency, that means they usually will record the transaction in terms of DC. And then on 2002, 1st of November, the company purchased 1,000 shares of the high-tech Inc. at the price of $80 per shares. So they buy 1,000 shares. This share is a listed company in US, and then they need to pay US dollar 80 per share. Okay, 80 per share. And at that date, $1 US is equal to 1.79 DC. $1 US is able to exchange for 1.79 DC. And then at the year-end day, DC to US dollar is increased. It increased from 1.82. 1.82. It means that the US dollar is strong. The US dollar is appreciate. US dollars appreciate, and then you hold some asset that is denominated in US dollar. Therefore, you will have a exchange rate gain. You will have a exchange rate gain. And then at that moment, at the year-end day, the price of these shares increased from 80 to 100. Therefore, in this transaction at year-end day, you have 2 gains. One is gain from share price change from $80 to $100. The other is the exchange rate gains. The exchange rate is increased from 1.79 to 1.82 because you are holding some US dollar. Therefore, when you exchange to DC, you will get more money. You will get more money. 咁你買咗呢個1000股嘅美國股票啦，美金80蚊面值一股嘅。咁喺 year end day 嘅時候咧，佢就由80蚊升到100蚊。咁所以咧，純粹喺嗰個嘅股票嘅價格上邊，你就賺咗20蚊啦。咁另外啦，美金咧本來係1美金對1個7毫9嘅 DC， 後尾升到1美金咧就對1個8毫2嘅 DC 嘅。咁即係話咧，美金強咯喎，你 hold 住美金嘅嘢，而家人哋要嚟買你手頭上嘅，拎住 DC 要嚟換你手頭上嗰個嘅美金嘅股票嘅話咧，佢哋要攞多啲錢出嚟啦，咁所以你就有個 exchange gain 喺度，你就有個賺啦。咁所以咧，你就要去 record 翻賺兩浸啦，一浸係賺個 share price， 一浸係賺個 exchange rate 啦。Okay, so let's have a look on how to enter this transaction. So we will enter the transaction on 1st of November first. So on 1st of November 2002, when you buy the trading security, so remember, I forget to tell you, this is a trading security. That means fair value through P&L, trading security. So because you buy this trading security, therefore you will debit investment in trading security and then credit cash. How to calculate the amount? Each share worth $80, and then you buy 1,000 shares, and it worth 1.79 DC. So you record your functional currency is DC, so you need to record in DC amount. So the amount is 143,200. So this investment in shares is a non-monetary item carried at fair value. Remember, investment is a non-monetary item, and then it carry at fair value. It carry at fair value. So how about year-end day? Year-end day, because it is carried at fair value, therefore, if you still remember non-monetary item measured at fair value, we also need to use the exchange rate when the fair value was determined. We need to use the closing rate, that is the year-end day rate, to do a retranslation. Therefore, the second transaction will be happen on 31st of December 2002. So how to calculate these figures? You will debit investment in trading security because increase in amount. So the trading security will increase. Increase how much? Credit gain in fair value of the trading security. This gain on fair value of trading security will go through P&L. It will be a P&L item. So how to calculate? Now the share worth $100, and then you have 1,000 share. And then now it worth 1.82 according to the exchange rate. So this is the existing price of the shares, existing share price, existing interest rate. sorry, existing exchange rate, and then you minus the original cost, Then the difference, it represents that there is exchange rate gain and also the fair value gain. Fair value is $20. The total amount is 38,800, right? So remember, this 38,800, actually it includes two effects. One effect is the exchange gain from 1.79 to 1.82. The other is the gain on fair value from $80 to $100. Therefore, we need to separate these two amounts. Of course, you do not need to separate calculate, but if you want to calculate separately, let me teach you how to calculate separately. So first of all, we'll calculate the unrealized holding gain. Unrealized holding gain, that means it changed from $80 to $100. And then under the existing exchange rate, what is the unrealized holding gain? Unrealized holding gain 嘅意思就係話你一日未賣出咧，咁你都係咧帳面賺嘅啫，帳面賺嘅，咁我哋叫做 unrealized holding gain 啦。For the unrealized holding gain, you record you have a gain of $20 from $80 increase to 100. You will have $20 increase, and then you are using the existing currency rate. Then the unrealized holding gain is here. How about if you just look at the exchange gain? If you just focus on the exchange gains, don't think about the change in the fair value. You just keep it as $80, and then the changes is only regarding the exchange rate. Then $80 times 1,000, and then times the increase in the exchange rate. Then this amount represents that the only change in the exchange rate is this amount. When you compare these two amounts, add it up all together, it becomes this amount. So you can either separate record it or record it together. 咁你可以拆開入數啦，又或者其實夾埋入都冇所謂噶啦。咁夾埋入你識得點樣計，拆開入你又識得點計就得啦。Okay, understand about unrealized holding gain and also the exchange gain. How to determine these two amount, right? If you feel that this also important to you, you can copy it down. How to separate this 38,800 into unrealized holding gain and also exchange gain. Okay, any questions on that? So if no, let's continue, right? So we have go through the transaction about the investment in shares, and it is a non-monetary item carried at fair value. You need to do it once at the transaction days, and then you need to retranslate it again on the year-end day, Okay, next transactions, let's go back to the previous slide. So on 10th of December 2002, you purchase a equipment, and then you purchase the equipment from a German company. This German company require you to pay 100,000 euro. 100,000 euro, you need to pay the amount. And then at that time, the euro is increasing from 2.82 to 2.95. That means as the time passed by, your accounts payable is increasing due to the euro is increasing. It increased from 2.82 to 2.95. 咁你咧同德國公司買咗一個 equipment 啦，咁你要俾翻10萬蚊歐元人哋嘅。咁嗰個歐羅咧，你到時係要還10萬蚊嘅。咁現價咧就係2.82對1歐羅，到你 settle 嗰日咧係已經係2.95對1歐羅啦，所以你就要攞多啲嘅 DC 出嚟先至 settle 到呢個10萬蚊嘅歐羅。咁所以咧，你喺呢個 case 入邊咧，你就有個 exchange loss 啦。So you will suffer the loss due to the appreciate of the euro. Now you hold, you have the liability, right? Then you need to pay more money. So how to do that? Let me show you the transaction. So first of all, you need to record when you purchase the equipment. So you will debit equipment and then credit accounts payable, debit equipment and then credit accounts payable. And this accounts payable, remember, you need to pay in euro. You need to pay in euro. Therefore, debit equipment will be 100,000 times 2.82 debit equipment and then credit accounts payable when you purchase it. Remember, this equipment is recorded at the spot rate, that is actual rate in the purchasing date. So remember, this equipment, if you look back, the equipment is here, some PPE. This is non-monetary item measured at cost. So non-monetary item measured at historical cost, no adjustment. However, you have the AP, right? AP here. accounts payable. It is a monetary liability. When it is a monetary liability, you need to measure it again using the closing rate at the year-end day. Therefore, this amount, accounts payable, you need to remeasure it again. You need to remeasure this green color again. So how to do that? At year-end day, let's have a look. At year-end day, you need to calculate the amount. Originally, I owe you 100,000 of the euro, and then the euro has increased the rate from 2.82 to 4.85. Therefore, we need to pay more amounts to settle this 100,000 euro. Finally, you will suffer a loss. When you suffer a loss, go directly into income statement. Finally, you will debit exchange loss and then credit accounts payable. Debit exchange loss and then credit accounts payable. So this is to record the exchange rate for 31st of December. Finally, on 28th of February, you need to measure again before you settle the amount. And then at that date, the rate increased from 2.85 to 2.95. That means you need to pay more DC in order to settle this 100,000 euro. Right? Finally, you will debit exchange loss and then credit accounts payable again for a further 10,000 loss in this exchange. And then on 28th, you settle the amount. Totally, how much you need to pay? First of all, you need to pay 282,000. Secondly, you need to pay further 3,000. And then the other day, you need to pay further 10,000. Therefore, finally, you need to pay 295,000 in total to settle this accounts payable because of the exchange rate of the DC is depreciate while euro is appreciate. 咁你會見到咧喺會計嘅帳目上面就係咁啦。其實如果你乜嘢都唔入嘅話咧，你最尾都係要找29.5萬㗎。你直接將2.95減翻 day one 嗰個數。咁但係咧喺 accounting standard 上邊咧，由於我哋有個 exchange loss 啦，咁我哋就要慢慢 show 俾人哋睇。喺 year end day 度已經要話俾 user 聽，我有機會有個 loss 啦。咁然後去到28號咧，最終咧真係 loss 定係真係 gain 咧，咁我哋到時可以再入冇問題。咁但係亦都係因為 prudence 嘅 concept 嘅關係咧，咁所以當我哋發現有 loss 咧，我哋就已經要 record 啦。咁 year end day 我哋就已經要假設定咧，我哋有個 loss 喺度啦。So this will be the settlement of the accounts payable. So see if you have any questions on how to prepare this entry. Okay, if no, let me give you an exercise. So let me arrange in this way, and then you can have more time. So now is 4:20, right? So we will have 10 minutes break from 4:20 to 4:30. And then after the break, we will do the exercise and then I will check the exercise. So 4:30 to 4:40, you need to do exercise 1. And I will go through the exercise 1 a little bit. For exercise 1, totally we will have 4 journal entry. We will have 1 journal entry on the transaction day, and then 1 entry at year-end day, and then 2 entry at the settlement day. So can you please take out this exercise? I have uploaded to Moodle. So totally, you will have 4 journal entry. The first journal entry will be happen on 1st of November. And then the second journal entry, 1 journal entry will be happen on 31st of December. And then finally, we will have 2 journal entry that happen on the settlement date, that is 31st of January. So now I give you 10 minutes breaks from 4:20 to 4:30. And then from 4:30 to 4:40, you need to prepare the exercise 1. And then totally is 4 journal entry. And then I will see you again in 4:40, and then we will check the answer together. OK， 咁10分鐘 break 之後，咁俾10分鐘你做條數啦。咁我哋4:40咧就會去對翻個答案。好，咁稍後再見你啦。 Okay, shall we check the answer together for this chapter 8 exercise 1? So here it tells you about the company, Alpha Company, whose functional currency is dollar. That means they usually will use the dollar to record in their financial statement. They purchase a goods that invoiced at the foreign currency, that is FC, that is the currency, FC, 215,000 on 1st of November 2001, and then the amount is to be settled on 31st of January, and then the year end date is 31st of December. So let's look at that. It gives you about the different exchange rates. On the transaction day, 1st of November 2001, the exchange rate is 1 FC. It can be exchanged for $1.5, while on the settlement on the year end day, it is 1.45 to $1 FC, and finally for January, it's 1.48 to 1 FC. So let's have a look for that. So first, on the 1st of November, when you purchase this inventory, you will debit inventory and then calculate the amount of the FC currency. That is FC 215,000 and then times 1.5. Then it will equal to the dollar, because their functional currency is dollar, right? Then you will debit inventory and then credit accounts payable for 375,000 on the dates of the transaction using the spot rate at that date. This is the actual rate and also the historical rate. And then on 21st of December, you can see that 1.45 now can exchange for one FC. The amount is decreasing. Therefore, you will have the exchange gain, because originally you buy 215,000 FC. In terms of FC dollar is 215. You need to pay 1.5 as the dollars in the exchange rate. Now the exchange rate is changed to 1.45. Therefore, you do not need to pay too much. Instead, you can debit accounts payable and then credit exchange gains to represent that you pay less money because of the exchange rates difference. Therefore, because it is an exchange gain, there will debit accounts payable and then credit exchange gain. 本來個半先至換到一個 FC 嘅，咁你要找數俾人咧係找 FC 25萬啦。咁如果計翻 dollar 嚟講，你要找個半。而家計翻 dollar 咧，你找一個4毫半就得啦。咁所以其實咧你就俾少咗啦，相對一個4毫半就可以換到一個 FC， 同埋一個半先至換到一個。And later on the settlement day, you will calculate on that date, the exchange rate increase a little bit. Now it is in favor to you. You need to pay 1.48 in order to settle $1 of the FC. Therefore, there is a depreciate in the exchange rate. Therefore, you will suffer a loss. Finally, you will debit exchange loss and then credit accounts payable. So in this case, at the year-end day, there is exchange gain. At the settlement day, there will be exchange loss. Finally, on 31st of January 2002, you need to settle the amount and then you need to calculate how much is the amount. It should be originally 375,000 and then you have an exchange gain. You can pay less. You need to minus 12,500. Later on, you need to pay more, 7,500. Therefore, the financial transaction finally will become debit accounts payable. You add up all the amounts and then credit cash. So you will add up 375,000 and then minus 12,500 for the exchange gain. And then finally, you will have an exchange loss for 7,500. Okay, so please check whether you do it correctly or not. So for transaction, it will not be that difficult. This is not gain whenever there's exchange. Whatever exchange gain or fair value gain, can I just write gain or no? You cannot. This is not. This accounts payable is the monetary liability. Monetary liability is exchange gain or loss. We only want write fair value gain or loss on investment item that designated at fair value. 呢個 gain or loss 係 fair value， 唔係 fair value 嘅 change 啊嘛，係 exchange rate change 啊嘛。fair value 嗰啲只係investment 嗰啲先得。Okay, so any questions about this 4 transaction? Can you do it correctly? Because for transaction item, individual transaction item, that means for transaction exposure, it is not that difficult. The difficult one will be the translation exposure. Transaction exposure 就比較容易嘅，因為呢啲可能你以前都會面對過或者做過或者其實你都可以諗到個做法係點樣嘅。咁所以咧 transaction exposure 就唔難做嘅。咁但係咧我哋 focus 嘅主要都會係 translation exposure 先至複雜啦。Okay, so if you do not have any questions on the transaction exposure, we will move to translation exposure. Translation exposure. So let's go back to our PowerPoint slide, slide 19. Slide 19. Okay, so let's go back to slide 19. We have just stopped in slide 18, right? So in slide 18, we are talking about foreign operations. If you are the foreign operation, you need to determine your functional currency. When you determine your functional currency, you need to usually use the local currency or parent's functional currency. Now we are going to look at two cases. So let me tell you from the angle of foreign operation, how to determine functional currency. 跟住落嚟咧，我哋就想睇一睇咧，我哋點樣去 determine functional currency 呢一樣嘢啦。Okay, so let's look at it. There are different indicators. And then for the indicator, if the foreign operations functional currency is local currency, then the functional currency will be Hong Kong dollar. What does it mean? I will let you know in detail. So before I go further, let me give you a case first. 咁咧，我用一個 case 嘅方法咧去解釋俾你聽。咁呢個 case 咧，你可以聽啦，或者你覺得啱用嘅，你可以抄低。咁呢個 case 咧，如果係 case one 咧，就會係中間呢行紅色嘅，紅色對應翻紅色。如果係case two 咧，就會對應翻藍色呢行，藍色呢行咧就對應翻最尾呢個 column 啦。So let me give you some backgrounds. So now I have a company called P. P is a Australia manufacturer. It is a parent company. P means parent company. So this parent company is a Australia manufacturer. Therefore, it is located in Australia. So its local currency is functional currency in the financial statement, and then is consolidated financial statement, that is the presentation currency, or is in AUD, because this is a Australia company. They located in Australia, of course, their local currency is AUD. Their functional currency, they record in their financial statement using the AUD. Finally, when they present their financial statement, consolidated financial statement to present on their website to their user, they also use AUD. So local currency, functional currency, and presentation currency of this parent Australian manufacturer is AUD. And then there is another company called S. S is a Hong Kong trading company. S is a Hong Kong trading company because it located in Hong Kong. Therefore, Hong Kong dollar is local currency. Hong Kong dollar is local currency. Okay, so understand the background, right? Okay, so after you know the background, let's have a look for case one. So I give you two cases. Case one, that is in the middle column, we assume that this P company acquired this as subsidiaries. And then it acquired the subsidiaries. Finally, the subsidiaries will pay Hong Kong dollar to purchase goods and sell goods internationally. What does it mean? Even though the Australia company is a manufacturer, the subsidiaries have the freedom to choose whether they want to purchase from the Australia manufacturer or not. So in this case, they will purchase goods and sell goods internationally, and then they will use Hong Kong dollar. Therefore, in this case, I will write it down. Functional currency is Hong Kong dollar. If you cannot see it clearly, let me put it in this way. So you can write it down under this column. The foreign or functional currency for this company will be Hong Kong dollar. So write it down for the second case. For case one in the middle of the column, you write it down. Assume that this company's functional currency is Hong Kong dollar. So here it also says functional currency is the local currency. That means functional currency is Hong Kong dollar. Okay, so this is case one. And you also write it down, the currency here. The functional currency for the second case is AUD because it says that the functional currency is parent's functional currency. So you can write it down. You can write it down here. That means functional currency for the second case. For the second case is AUD. 咁你寫低咯喎，中間嘅 column 嘅嗰間公司咧，佢嘅 functional currency 就係 Hong Kong dollar，而側邊嘅呢個 case 2嘅呢間公司咧，佢嘅 functional currency 就係 AUD。你寫又得，唔寫又得，其實佢 heading 嗰度都有噶啦。不過寫咗就容易少少睇啦嚇，咁你自己決定啦。Okay, so you know that in case 1, the functional currency is local currency, that is Hong Kong dollar. In case 2, the functional currency is parent's functional currency, that is AUD. Okay, so how about case 2? Let's look at case 2. Case 2 here is the subsidiaries is a newly incorporated company. This company is incorporated in Hong Kong by P. That means before that there is no S company, and then P company set up these subsidiaries in Hong Kong. And the mission of these subsidiaries actually is because the Australia is a manufacturer. These subsidiaries need to pay AUD dollars to purchase the goods produced by P and then help to sell the goods internationally. Okay, so this is the two background of these subsidiaries. Let's look at it one by one. So let's look at the operating relationship with the parent. For case 1, this foreign operation are carried with significant degree of autonomy from the parent. 好高嘅自主權. So they do not need to listen to the Australia company. They can design their own transaction. They can design their own operation. Therefore, they can pay Hong Kong dollar to purchase goods and then sell internationally. They do not need to follow the instruction of the parent company. However, for case 2, this S company actually is set up by P in order to purchase the goods from the manufacturer and then sell overseas. So we will say that the relationship between the parent and the subsidiaries, we will say that this foreign operation are carried out as an extension of the parent company. 佢只係母公司喺香港嘅延續版. Okay, so actually it is operation is directly based on the instruction of the of the parent company. They do not have the rights, they do not have the freedom to choice. They operate under the instruction of the parent company. So let's look at the transaction with the parent company. In case 1, the transaction with the parent company will be very low. Maybe they just have some receivable and payable. It is not that much because the holding company and the subsidiaries, they will operate individually. However, under case 2, because the subsidiaries need to pay AUD to purchase the goods produced by P, therefore we will say that it has a high proportion with the holding company. It will have a high proportion with the holding company. Unlike this situation, there will be low proportion. How about the cash flow interdependence? So under the case 2, because the subsidiaries need to pay AUD dollar to purchase the goods from P, if S has problem to pay the AUD dollars to the Australia, then Australia's cash flow will have problem. Finally, we will say that the foreign operations cash flow will be directly affect the parent company. If the subsidiary have not enough money to pay, then the parent company will suffer from the cash flow risk. However, under the case 1, there is not a high proportion of total activity between the holding company and the subsidiaries. We will say that the foreign operations cash flow do not directly affect the parent company because their proportion of transaction is quite low. Okay. Finally, financial interdependence. Under the first case, because it has the degree of autonomy, it can think about everything themselves. Therefore, we will say that the foreign operation is self-sufficient and not depend on the parent. They can do it themselves. They do not need to rely on the parent company. Unlike case 2, because they mainly purchase from the holding company and then sell overseas, and then they set up by the holding company. Actually, the main purposes is to sell the goods on behalf of the holding company. Therefore, we will say that this foreign operation is depend on the parent's company. It depends on the parent's company. Okay, any questions about this case study? 得唔得？咁啊，俾咗一個 case 嚟，咁有一個咁樣嘅 case 嘅例子咧，後邊解起所有嘢上嚟咧就會容易啲啦。咁所以你覺得啱用咧，你可以抄低上面呢個簡單嘅 case。 Okay, so if no questions, let's continue. Therefore, under this case, case 1, because the subsidiaries has freedom to choose everything, and then they enter all the transaction in terms of Hong Kong dollar. Finally, they will choose the local currency, that is Hong Kong dollar, as their functional currency. Unlike these subsidiaries, actually they need to follow the instruction of the Australia, and then they need to purchase a lot of goods from the Australia. Therefore, their functional currency will follow the parent's functional currency. So remember, when we determine the currency, functional currency, we will usually determine on the local currency, like case 1, or parent's functional currency, like case 2. Okay, any questions about that? So if no questions, let's continue. Let's move forward to the next part. So in the case one, because it's functional currency, it chooses to use Hong Kong dollar. It uses Hong Kong dollar because it operates independently. Therefore, their functional currency can be used local currency, or they can use third currency. But I would suggest not to use third currency, otherwise it will be more complicated. So they choose Hong Kong dollar as your functional currency. However, at the end, they need to submit their financial statement to the holding company for them to do the consolidation. Therefore, from the angle of this first case company, they need to present in AUD later on, and then they need to translate their financial statement into AUD in order to present to the holding company. Then they need to change their functional currency, Hong Kong dollar, into presentation currency, AUD. Under this situation, according to the accounting standard, they need to use closing rate method to do the translation. So I will let you know what does it mean, closing rate method, but you just need to know the name. For this kind of translation, we will use closing rate method. Okay, any questions about that? So for case 1, because it chooses functional currency as Hong Kong dollar, and then when they present the financial statements to the Australia, they need to present in AUD. Therefore, it is a change from functional currency to presentation currency. How about in case 2? In case 2, you know that this subsidiaries actually is the extension of the holding company. So the foreign operation is integrated with parent's operation. So they go together with the operation of the parent company. And then they choose the functional currency, same as the parent currency. So for them, their functional currency is already AUD. And then their presentation currency is also AUD. Once you determine functional currency as AUD, other than AUD, they will be foreign currency. Don't forget that when they operate in Hong Kong, sometimes they need to pay Hong Kong dollar for the salary, for the rent, etc. Right? Therefore, their foreign currency is Hong Kong dollar. In this case, when they translate the foreign currency into functional currency, because they keep the book as functional currency AUD, then they need to use a method called remeasurement method. And then for remeasurement method, there will be another name called temporal method. That means apart from the AUD purchase from the holding company, sometimes they need to pay the rent, they need to pay the salary, etc. They will use the Hong Kong dollar to determine in this financial statement. Then when they want to translate it into functional currency, they need to use remeasurement method. So you just need to bear in mind for these two methods. And then we will give you the details about how to do the translation. Okay, understand about the closing rate method. Closing rate method is when you change from functional currency to presentation currency. Most company will use in this way. And when you when your functional currency is same as your presentation currency, but when your daily booking, enter into the book, you use some of the foreign currency, just like Hong Kong dollar. Then when you do the translation, you need to use the remeasurement method. So understand these two methods, and then let's continue. So what does it mean, closing rate method? So closing rate method is easy. All the item in the asset and liability, we will retranslate it again using year-end day rate. Ignore whether they are monetary or non-monetary. Anyway, every asset, every liability will use the closing rate. And every item included in the income statement and included as income or expenses, we will use the average rate or actual rate. How to determine when to use actual rate and when to use average rate? Actual rate is for items that pay only once. For example, tax expenses, for example, dividend, then you use actual rate. For average rate, you will have maybe 100 transactions of sales every day, or you will have 12 transactions for salary, maybe 12 transactions for rent expenses. For that kind of expenses that happen more than once, you will use average rate. Otherwise, if it just happened 1 or 2 times in the year, you will use actual rate. So for closing rate method that apply to case 1, it is easy. When you do the translation for the asset and liability, just use the closing rate. When you translate income and expenses, just using the actual rate or the average rate. And then when you do the translation, there will be aroused the translation gain or loss. Under closing rate method, all the translation gain or loss will be recorded in the equity, under the equity. I will explain to you the reason behind, right? Okay, so you just remember these 3 important things. Asset liability, using closing rate. Income and expenses, use actual rate and average rate. Translation gain or loss, put it under equity. So the reason behind is, remember, this foreign operation is viewed as a passive investment from the angle of the parent. Why the parent want to invest in this company? The parent's aim is just to obtain return from this foreign operation in form of the dividend or capital appreciation. So the share price increase, they will earn something. The subsidiaries earn the profit, they will enjoy the dividend, right? Therefore, their focus is just the dividend and the capital appreciation. And also, the translation difference will not have immediate effect on the parent's cash flow. You just translate your financial statement and then to shoot my presentation only. It will not affect my cash flow due to the translation. Therefore, we will think that because it will not affect the parent's cash flow, it's just to translate the item from the functional currency to presentation currency. Therefore, in this case, all the translation gain or loss, we will not put full income statement. Instead, we'll go through the equity account. Just put it in other comprehensive income. So you need to bear in mind for that. This is the accounting standard that designated the closing rate method. You will record the translation gain or loss in under the equity. Okay, how about in case 2? In case 2, we will use the remeasurement method. So in case 2, think about from this way. In case 2, this foreign operation transaction actually is deemed to have the parent's foreign currency transaction. What does it mean? Remember, under the second situation, this foreign operation is only an extension of the parent. That means the parent operate in Hong Kong through these subsidiaries. Therefore, foreign operation transaction is deemed that the parent carry out foreign currency transaction in Hong Kong. Therefore, any of the transaction actually will affect the cash flow of the parent's company. So under the accounting standard, it say that translation difference that arise from the remeasurement method, because it will impact the parent's cash flow, it will be taken into the income statement. 咁由於佢係母公司嘅延續版，咁佢做生意即係等於母公司做生意，咁即係會影響母公司嘅 cash inflow 同 outflow 啦。咁所以喺呢種情況之下咧 ，standard 就話啦，如果個 translation gain or loss 係 due to remeasurement method 咧，我哋就要有落 income statement。Okay, so this is the basic requirement about the 2 different methods. You just get some idea, and then we will revisit again of this requirement later. Okay, so now we will have 2 methods. Let's compare these 2 methods. So under the closing rate method and remeasurement method, how to translate the balance sheet item? So the balance sheet item, we will have share capital and pre-acquisition retained earning. Remember, this is from the angle of the group. When you, from the angle of the group, you will purchase the subsidiaries for maybe at 31st of January, 2000, for example, like that. And then at that day, we will have the share capital and also pre-acquisition retained earning. So this share capital and this pre-acquisition retained earning, when we do the translation, we will use the historical rate. What is the mean of historical rate? Which day you start own these subsidiaries? That way is the historical rate. So we will translate it at the historical rate under the closing rate method and under the remeasurement method. Both share capital and pre-acquisition Retained earning at the date of acquisition, we will use historical rate, that is the acquisition date rate. How about post-acquisition retained earning? So think about the nature of retained earning. Retained earning, you do not have that amount. That amount actually is by calculation. You will use all the income from the income statement minus all the expenses from the income statement, and then you get the profit, and then you pay tax, and then you pay dividend, and then the remaining one you do not distribute to the shareholder. It will become retained earning. Therefore, retained earning, it comes from income, it comes from expenses, it comes from dividend, it comes from opening retained earning. All of this need to do the calculation. So finally, this amount you do not need to translate because this figure is a balancing figure. It is a cumulative figures carry forward from year to year. So this item you do not need to do the translation.咁 retained earning 咧唔使特別計嘅，記唔記得我哋做 console worksheet 都係㗎，喺個 income statement 計咗幾多就直接搬去落去 retained earning 嗰度。咁同樣地啦，呢一個 retained earning 都係㗎，佢係透過 income statement 上面嘅 income 減 expenses 啦，減 tax expense 啦，減埋 dividend 之後，再加翻舊年嘅 opening retain 而達至出嚟嘅，所以佢係經過一輪嘅計算，佢係一個 balancing figures 嚟㗎。咁呢個 balancing figures 咧會因應住個 income 點樣變啦 ，expenses 點樣變啦 ，dividend 點樣變啦 ，tax expenses 點樣變而出嚟嘅。咁所以呢個數咧就係帶落嚟嘅，就唔需要特別去做 translate 嘅。So under the closing rate method and remeasurement method, there will be no need to do any translate because these figures combine with the net effect of all the income statement. So it is a cumulative figures carried out from year to year. And then how about the other balance sheet item? We will have asset and liability. For asset and liability, we will classify them as monetary asset and liability, non-monetary asset and liability. And for non-monetary asset and liability, we'll classify them as non-monetary asset and liability at historical cost and non-monetary at fair value. 咁除咗 share cap 同 retain 之外咧，另一邊我哋就會有所有嘅資產同負債啦。咁資產同負債我哋就分開為 monetary asset and liability 或者係 non-monetary asset and liability。而 non-monetary asset and liability 咧，我哋亦都有分 non-monetary asset and liability at historical cost 同埋 non-monetary item at fair value 嘅。Okay, so for monetary asset and liability under the closing rate method, you use closing rate to do the translation. Under the remeasurement method, you're also using the closing rate to translate the method. So you can see that all the share capital, pre-acquisition retained earning, post-acquisition retained earning, monetary assets and liability, the two methods will be the same. A true method will be the same. How about non-monetary item at fair value? Remember, non-monetary item at fair value under closing rate method also use closing rate. Under remeasurement method, we need to remeasure it at fair value at year-end day. When you measure at fair value at year-end day, actually you are also using the closing rate day. So for non-monetary item at fair value, on the face, it seems that the translation is not different. But if you look closer, this is using the closing rate. That means year-end day rate. When you under the remeasurement method, when you remeasure the non-monetary item at fair value, you also measure the fair value at year-end day. So if you look closer, actually they are using the same rate. 咁 non-monetary asset monetary item at fair value 咧，表面上睇嚟咧就好似大家用緊唔同嘅方法，不過佢咧就擺明佢用 closing rate 啦，因為佢叫做 closing rate method。佢咧雖然唔叫做 closing rate，但係因為咧佢係一個carry at fair value，所以佢 year end day 嘅時候都要睇 fair value。咁如果都要睇 fair value 嘅話咧，咁所以佢係 year end day 就要 translate as fair value 啦。咁所以呢一個咧就係 date of revaluation at year end day。咁所以咧暗地裏咧佢嘅做法其實都係用緊 closing rate。So finally, actually this fair value non-monetary item at fair value also using the closing rate to do the fair value translation at year-end day. So we will say that it has the same treatment here. It has the same treatment here. Only which one will have not the same treatment? Only the non-monetary asset and liability carry at historical cost will be different. For non-monetary asset and liability carry at historical cost, just like the prepay, unearned, non-refundable deposit, or the PPE, or the intangible asset, And then that part we will say that add it at cost. Then under the closing rate method, still using the closing rate. However, under the remeasurement method, you will use historical rate because it is based on historical cost. So this is the first difference. This is the first difference between the closing rate method and remeasurement method. It only falls on the non-monetary item and liability at historical cost, such as the PPE, the intangible asset, the inventory, etc. And what's the other difference? The other difference is on the translation gain or loss. Remember, under the closing rate method, all the translation gain or loss will be put into the equity, while under the remeasurement method, all the translation gain or loss will put into the income statement. So the highlighted box in red here show you the two difference in the balance sheet item for closing rate methods and also remeasurement method. You just need to bear in mind they only have two difference. One is about how to handle the translation gain or loss. One is about how to handle about the non-monetary assets and liability carried at historical cost. Okay, any questions on this slide about the balance sheet item? If no, let's continue about the P&L item. Let's continue about the P&L item. So for the P&L item, under the closing rate method and under the remeasurement method, for all the sales, purchase, expenses, taxations, we use actual rate or average rate under the closing rate method and under the remeasurement method. For dividend, we will usually use the actual rate because dividend we usually pay once in the year or twice in the year. Therefore, you will use the actual rate. As I mentioned to you, for those items you just pay once or twice, it is easy to find out the actual rate. For the item, for example, you have 100 or 200 transactions every day, such as the purchase and the sales, then we will use average rate. Under the two methods about sales, purchase, expenses, taxation, and also dividend, it is the same. However, for cost of goods sold and depreciation and amortization, the two measurement will be different. Under the closing rate method, cost of goods sold is also use the average or actual rate. The depreciation is also use the actual or average rate. Therefore, for closing rate method, there is only one way to do that, average or actual. However, under remeasurement method, when you look at the details of cost of goods sold, actually cost of goods sold is equal to opening inventory. This OI means opening inventory plus purchase minus closing inventory, and then we will get the cost of goods sold. So this cost of goods sold involve the purchase. So purchase here, you can see it here. Purchase, we use average rate or actual rate. However, opening inventory and closing inventory, we will use historical rate because inventory is a non-monetary asset using the cost designated at cost. Let me show you. We have go through here, right? In slide 28. Inventory, it is non-monetary item measured at cost, right? Therefore, since it is measured at cost, finally, when we calculate the cost of goods sold, it involves opening inventory plus purchase minus closing inventory. So for these figures, they will be combined with actual and average rate and also historical rate. So we need to have a note to have a detailed calculation about this item, cost of sales. Cost of sales 咧，佢係由三嚿數組成嘅。呢三嚿數入邊咧有兩嚿數係用 historical rate， 有一嚿數係用 average 或者 actual rates 嘅。咁所以咧 cost of goods sold 咧，如果 under remeasurement method 咧要重新計算過。Same as depreciation and amortization. Amortization and depreciation actually is to allocate the cost of the PPE. Remember, the PPE is a non-monetary item PPE carried at cost. Therefore, when we calculate the depreciation under the remeasurement method, we also need to use the historical rate. It will be more complicated. Assume that we have 5 intangible asset and tangible asset. Then all these 5 assets will need to calculate depreciation and amortization. And all these fixed assets will be purchased at different day. So every depreciation will need to use different rates to do some calculation and then add it up. 咁因為咧，我哋嘅 depreciation 其實就係將我哋嘅 cost of asset 慢慢去攤分去 systematic 咁 allocate 形成咗 depreciation 嘅。咁所以咧，如果你過去今年有總共有5件資產，呢5件資產喺5個唔同時段買入嘅話咧，個 depreciation 咧就要逐個計啦。第一件喺1月1號買，可能要用1月1號嘅 historical rate；第二件喺4月8號買，要用4月8號嘅 rate；第三件喺6月7號買，要用6月7號嘅 rate。Therefore, the depreciation and the amortizations will be calculated according to the historical rate. It will be a little bit complicated when you calculate it. How about if the fixed asset exists before the acquisition date? Then, if acquired before acquisition date, we will use the rate of acquisition date. 咁你要 bear in mind 啦。如果我有5件資產，有一件係收購前已經存在嘅，咁我唔知收購前佢幾時買嘅，咁我哋最早有嘅 dates 嘅 rate 咧就會係收購當日嘅 rate， 咁你就要用收購當日嘅 rate 啦。Okay, so bear in mind for that. So here it gives you about the difference between closing rate method and remeasurement method. So please remember this slide 23 and 24. When we prepare the translation, we need to go back to these 2 slides to make a reference and then do your translation. Okay, any questions? If no, we will continue to slide 37. We'll continue to slide 35. Sorry, 35. Okay, so let's move to 35. Okay, so we are talking about how to translate the financial statement. So we have already learned that when we want to translate the financial statement, we will have the 2 methods. And then the 2 methods we have already go through, that is the closing rate method and also the remeasurement method. So now let's have a look on how does it work. Okay, now we are looking at the translation exposure. So before the break, we have already go through transaction exposure, and transaction exposure is easy to do that because you have already have the concept on how to translate it. And then we talk about the translation exposure. So translation exposure is arising from translation, and then it will result translation gain or loss. And then when we talk about the translation exposure, it means from the angle of the group level. From the angle of the group level, that is when you prepare the consolidated financial statement. So we will say that for individual company, that means standalone company, they have the choice to determine their functional currency. They are also free to determine their presentation currency. So we will usually do not consider about the standalone company to do the translation exposure. 咁如果係一間 individual 嘅公司，佢冇子公司、冇母公司，唔係一個集團公司嘅角度咧，其實佢就唔使煩咁多嘢啦，亦都唔好無端端搞咁多嘢啦。佢應該咧，佢嘅 functional currency 係咩？佢嘅 presentation currency 係就係乜嘢啦？佢應該將兩樣嘢咧盡量做到相同，否則的話佢自己要去 translate 一次咧就好花時間啦。其實就唔需要咁做嘅，只要佢係一個 individual 嘅公司，喺香港嘅公司，冇人話個 presentation currency 一定要 Hong Kong dollar 㗎。咁所以你中意用咩 currency 做你嘅 functional currency， 就請你用翻乜嘢 currency 做你嘅 presentation currency 啦。咁就唔 suppose 咧呢一個嘅 translation 會影響到 standalone 公司嘅。However, for the group entity, you have no choice. But for standalone company, you have choice. You can designate your functional currency same as your presentation currency. Then you do not need to do anything. If your functional currency same as your presentation currency, then you do not need to go through the closing rate method, right? However, for group entity, they have no choice. Their presentation currency is already designated by the parent company, and then they need to determine their functional currency. Therefore, for the company, if they can determine their functional currency, which is different from their presentation currency, when they want to do the translation, they need to use closing rate method. Closing rate method from functional currency to presentation currency. For closing rate methods, remember, standalone company do not need to take care about that. Closing rate method is to translate functional currency to presentation currency. In diagram is from this in the middle functional currency to the right hand side run presentation currency. So for standalone company, you better use functional currency and presentation currency as the same currency to avoid this translation. But for a foreign operation, it will record its book in functional currency, but they need to translate it into parent's presentation currency. So they need to use the closing rate method. For the remeasurement method, again, it is to translate the foreign currency in functional currency because they choose the functional currency same as the presentation currency, and then their local currency will become their foreign currency. And sometimes they need to pay the expenses in terms of the local currency, such as the rents, the tax expense, the salary. Then they need to translate the foreign currency into functional currency. At that moment, they need to use the remeasurement method. Again, for the remeasurement method, if you are the stand-alone company, you try to avoid this, and then you do not need to do the translation. But for foreign operation, they will usually record in local currency. But if their functional currency need to be same as the presentation currency, then they need to use the remeasurement method to do the translation. Okay, so these two slides actually tell you about the picture of this diagram. Functional currency to presentation currency using closing rate method. Foreign currency to functional currency using the remeasurement method. OK， 呢幾張 slide 其實就係想話俾你聽幾時用咩 method 嘅啫。好啦，咁如果有題目俾你啦，你一定要諗下啦。其實佢依家想我咧由乜嘢轉做乜嘢，然後你再決定咧你要用 remeasurement method 定係 closing rate method。好，咁下一張 slide 咧就會教你去諗呢一樣嘢啦。Okay, so this slide, I will say that they do not give you a lot of details. So let me give you another way to explain this. Let me supplement for some of the information. 咁 instead of 解呢一張咧，我會覺得呢度入邊咧個資料咧略欠詳細啊。咁我咧自己做咗另外一個同呢個類似嘅，咁我想同你 share 翻呢一張。咁你跟呢一個去聽咧就 OK 噶啦。So this will be the worksheet here. Okay, let me send it to you. And then I will explain it together with you together. Okay, you can open this slide. You can open this worksheet. Okay, when you click on it, you will find a slide here. I call it slide 37 and 40. So I intend to include this diagram. So this diagram, I make it in this worksheet here. Foreign currency to functional currency to presentation currency, we'll use measurement method, remeasurement method or closing rate method. 咁我就將 slide 37嘅嗰個 diagram 搬咗喺呢一度俾你睇啦。And then I also include the details about the slide 40. You can read it later. And then there are a lot of worksheets here. What are they? Let me explain a little bit to you. So we will totally need to do three exercises for this chapter 8. One is called exercise 2. For the same questions under exercise 2, you need to use CR. CR means closing rate method. You also need to use remeasurement method. The same questions, the same figures, you need to calculate it in closing rate method and also remeasurement method. And then I give you the worksheet here. Actually, I have uploaded the worksheet on Moodle, but that Moodle worksheet is in terms of PDF file. And then here is in terms of Excel file. It is easier for you to use. I will show you later. And then for problem 8.2, you also need to do the closing rate method and also remeasurement method. And then I have also show you the details on the format here. And then for exercise problem find 8.3, you use to do minor company. And this minor company, you need to use closing rate method. And then you also need to do the remeasurement method for this minor company. Okay, so I show you all these figures here. And then what you need to do next week, if you know that for the under the closing rate method, all is use closing rate. So let me assume that, let me just say that maybe the closing rate is 1.34, and then when you take in 1.34, it will calculate it automatically. And then for cost of goods sold, you also need to use the closing rate methods. Then you just type in the rates, and then they will calculate for yourself. And then for the remeasurement methods, same here. Some of that you need to use the closing rate method, and then closing rate. And then for note A, remember cost of goods sold, we will have opening inventory plus purchase minus closing inventory equal to cost of goods sold. And then for opening inventory, we need to use historical rate, maybe 1.1. And then purchase, we need to use average rate, maybe 1.2. Or closing rate, we need to use closing rate method, that is the historical rate, maybe 1.5. Then you can calculate these figures, and this figure will automatically bring into here. Okay, so you can find out that this figures and then equals to this amount, and then they will do it yourself. So we will use this format later on. So just you keep this format at this moment, and then I will let you know how to do that. So you can just take in the exchange rate and then you can get the final figures. 咁呢一個Excel file 咧，你好 keep 住佢啦。咁下個禮拜當我哋做數嘅時候咧，就可以快啲啦，你就唔使撳計數機啦。我幫你做晒啲 linkage 喺度嘅。咁只要你揾啱個 rate 填落去，跟住佢就會自己跳翻晒啲 figures 出嚟㗎啦。咁我下個禮拜會教你點做，你可以 keep 住一個 Excel 啦嚇。And then for today, I will just use this Excel to go through the slide 40 with you. As I mentioned to you, slide 40, I think that they do not give you complete information. Therefore, I rewrite slide 40 here. So let me give you the idea now. So first of all, remember from foreign currency translate to functional currency, I use a blue arrow here. And then this represents remeasurement method. If you are translating from functional currency to presentation currency, I give you a red arrow here. That means closing rate method. So let me show you the matrix here. Assume that there is a parent company and this parent company is located in US. Therefore, this parent company's local currency is US dollar. And then assume that they choose functional currency and also presentation currency as US dollar. So this is the situation. And then we have a subsidiaries, and then the subsidiaries is located in Hong Kong, and then this subsidiary's local currency is Hong Kong dollar. So usually the question will give you this information. And then at the requirement part, they will tell you that finally, this Hong Kong company will choose what kind of currency as their functional currency and presentation currency. And then you need to think about what method they are going to use. 咁題目通常就會俾咗個 background information 嚟關於 holding company 啦，關於 subsidiaries 啦，然後最後佢就會話俾你聽 subsidiaries 揀咗乜嘢 functional currency 或者揀咗乜嘢 presentation currency。咁佢揀完之後咧，你就再諗下佢應該用 remeasurement method 定係 closing rate method 啦。Okay, so for case 1, assume that Hong Kong company choose Hong Kong dollar as functional currency. FC means functional currency. Assume that they choose Hong Kong dollar as functional currency. Therefore, local currency is Hong Kong dollar. Foreign currency is Hong Kong dollar is the local currency. And then functional currency is Hong Kong dollar. In this case, they have no choice to presentation currency. For the presentation currency, they must follow the US. They must follow the US. Therefore, they only have the right to choose functional currency as Hong Kong dollar. So at this moment, they need to translate their Hong Kong dollars into US dollar. That means translate from foreign functional currency to presentation currency. Therefore, they will use closing rate method for case 1. 如果 case 1呢間公司香港公司揀咗 Hong Kong dollar 做佢嘅 functional currency 咧，咁記住 presentation currency 冇得揀，要跟翻總公司嘅。咁所以咧，佢唯一要 translate 咧就係臨尾咧將個 functional currency 轉成 presentation currency。咁所以就行後邊嗰部分啦。咁佢就會用 closing rate method 啦。And then in case 2. If the Hong Kong company choose US dollar as the functional currency, and then presentation currency, they have no choice, is US dollar, but their local currency will become foreign currency. It should be Hong Kong dollar. 咁喺呢個情況之下，佢當佢揀咗 functional currency 美金咧，佢嘅 local currency 就會即刻變成咗 foreign currency 啦。Okay, other than functional currency will be the foreign currency. At that moment, Hong Kong dollar will become foreign currency. Hong Kong dollar, foreign currency, functional currency is US. You need to translate from Hong Kong dollar into US dollar. That is translate from foreign currency to functional currency. Then you need to use remeasurement method. Because for here, you do not need to do any translation. You are using US as the functional currency, and then your presentation currency is also US. No need to change in this part, but you need to change from foreign currency into functional currency. So you will use remeasurement method. And then for case 3, let me give you another assumption. Assume that this subsidiary is located in US. Okay, so here it say Hong Kong. Let me assume that a special case for case 3. Case 3, let me assume that this subsidiary is located in US, then the functional currency is US. So located in US, local currency is US, functional currency is US, and then presentation is US. Then you do not need to do anything because all local currency equals to functional currency, and it also equal to presentation currency. You do nothing. You do nothing for this case. Finally, for case 4, if you choose functional currency as AUD. So functional currency as AUD is a third currency. It is not same as the presentation currency. It is not same as the local currency. Then it will become more complicated. It will become more complicated. Firstly, you need to translate the foreign currency into functional currency. You need to translate foreign currency Hong Kong dollar to functional currency AUD. Then you need to use remeasurement method. And then later on, when you present the functional currency AUD, you need to submit a financial statement to the US using the presentation currency. You need to translate from functional currency AUD to presentation currency US dollar. Then you need to use closing rate method. You need to use closing rate method, right? Then you need to translate again. So in case 4, it will be more complicated because you need to do 2 translation. Therefore, remember in our slide, we have said that if you want to determine your functional currency, it is better to choose local currency, like our case, or like our case 1, or you better to choose parent functional currency, like our case 2. It will be easier. If you choose a third currency, like our case 4, then it will be complicated. You need to do 2 translation. You need to do 2 translation. Therefore, in our exercise, we will also ask you just focus on case 1 and case 2 because the company either choose the local currency as the functional currency or parent currency as their functional currency. 咁所以咧，我哋就應該要習慣咧，用翻港幣作為你嗰個嘅，用翻 local currency 作為你嘅 functional currency 啦，或者用翻 parent 嗰個嘅currency 作為你嘅 functional currency， 咁就會比較理想啦。Okay, understand that. Any questions on that? Okay, so if no, please keep this file and then we will use this Excel file to do the exercise for next week. Okay, so back to our PowerPoint slide now. So now we have finished slide 14, right? This is the different situation, and then we need to use different translation methods. Okay, next. When we do the translation, there will be translation exposure. That means there will be translation gain or loss when the exchange rate used is different from previous year. 好啦，咁如果無論你用緊咩 method 都好啦，如果用 historical rate 就好簡單嘅啫。historical rate 咧就係永遠都用嚟當日嘅 rate， 就算去到下一年你乜嘢都唔轉。所以如果一間公司永遠用 historical rate 去轉咧，其實每一年就係跟翻嗰個 rate 去轉，咁就唔會有 translation difference 㗎啦。但係如果你用 closing rate 去做 translation 咧，你可以想象年頭你有件資產，年尾你買多咗件資產，年頭你件資產唔買啦，年頭你有件資產係10蚊，年尾件資產仍然都係10蚊。咁年頭嗰件資產咧，佢就會用上年嘅 closing rate method， 咁會用上年嗰個 rate 去 recognize。但係去到今年咧，我哋就要將佢 update 啦，變成咗今年嘅 closing rate。咁所以如果你用 closing rate 咧，因為唔同嘅年份咧，佢嘅 closing rate 嘅 amount 嗰個 rates 都係唔同嘅，咁所以結果咧做出嚟咧就會有 exchange gain or loss. Because you are when there is exchange gain or loss, that means you are using different exchange rate, and the different exchange rate is different from previous years and current year. Finally, you will have a translation difference if you use closing rate method or using the closing rate. However, for those historical rate, you always use the rate at the beginning, at the date of the transaction, then there will be no translation difference. Therefore, how to calculate the translation exposure under closing rate methods and how to calculate the translation exposure under the remeasurement method. So I won't talk too details about this because if I use the essay form to tell you about the details about this, it is quite difficult for you to understand about that. Instead, for next class, I will go through the illustration tool. Throughout the illustration tool, I will give you the details about how to find out the translation exposure. 咁咧嗰個 exchange rate difference 咧點樣揾咧？咁其實如果我哋去睇翻嗰個文字版咧，嗰個解釋咧，其實係有啲困難嘅。講完可能你都唔明白嘅，咁所以我保留呢兩張 slide 唔講住。咁喺下個禮拜咧，我教完個 illustration tool 之後咧，我就會話俾你聽咧，原來我哋做完一個 illustration 過晒之後，當我哋 translate 晒咧，我哋可能會有個translation difference 嘅。呢個 translation difference 咧，其實可以解釋到點解有 difference 嘅。咁我到時咧先至教你點樣去解釋翻個 difference。咁嗰個解釋翻嘅 difference 嘅文字版咧，就係呢兩張 slide。咁下一次先再詳細話俾你聽啦。 Okay, so you just take a notes on these two slides, and I will explain to you later. Okay, so that's all for today's class. I will stop here. And then remember, I have told you at the beginning of the class, remember to submit your group assignment. 咁記住啦，喺上堂之前咧提咗幾點嘅。咁第一就係咧記得要交 group assignment 啦。咁每組交一份上 Moodle 就可以啦。咁咧就要用半版紙做翻個cover， 有翻你個名啦。咁我之前 send 過俾你㗎啦，我稍後都會 send 出嚟再提你。咁記得寫翻你個組別，我俾咗個 group number 你嘅，同埋個 question number， 亦都要寫翻咧你個組員係嚟自邊一個 module group， 咁每一組交一次去 Moodle 就得啦 ，in PDF format 又得 ，in Word format 又得，交一次就夠啦。亦都唔好多過4版紙，多過4版紙嘅，咁我哋就會唔改第4版紙之後嘅嘢啦。咁你可以第1版紙用半版嚟做嗰個嘅 cover sheet， 然後另外嗰半版可以答問題。咁記得答問題嘅時候咧，跟翻 A、B、C part 咁去答，跟翻 A、B、C part 咁去答嘅。咁另外咧，測驗咧呢一班同學嘅平均分咧就係48點幾嘅，唔夠49分嘅。咁最高分嘅嗰班咧平均分就62，咁最低分嗰班平均分42啦。咁呢班中中停停啦。咁同學做唔到嘅地方咧就係可能唔夠時間啦。我估你哋係咁做完嗰個嘅 console journal entry 之後咧，好多同學冇填翻個 worksheet。個 worksheet 如果你冇填最尾嘅 column 計咧，其實就冇意義嘅。基本上你係 score 唔到任何嘅 marks。咁最高分咧應該係有94分嚇，最高分都有同學94。咁有啲班嘅同學去到98分嘅。咁呢班最高都係去到94嘅啫。咁呢個禮拜尾咧，我哋就會將啲分咧update 晒之後，我哋會睇一次啦嚇。咁然之後我哋就會擺翻上去 Moodle 嗰度通知翻你，話俾你聽你個分數啦。咁另外就係關於嗰個嘅 final assessment 咧，我哋都係一個 take home 嘅 assignment。個詳情咧，我今個禮拜尾咧都會 send email 話俾你聽啦。咁take home assignment 咧就會係有5個小時俾你去做嘅。咁今次係一個 final exam 啦，咁希望同學咧就俾心機啲做啦。咁另外咧喺4月26號上晝嘅10至12啦，咁嗰個禮拜就 suppose 應該冇堂上啦，因為我哋上埋下個禮拜咧就應該正式完晒㗎啦。咁4月30號已經開始考試，咁嗰個禮拜冇堂咧，4月26號嘅上晝10點至12點咧，我就會加一個 revision class 俾3班我自己教嘅同學嘅，咁我就會簡單咁樣咧去同你溫翻一啲 upstream cells、downstream cells 應該要點做嘅，咁亦都咧你教完你點樣之後咧，你自己再去睇翻你嗰個測驗嗰度咧邊度做錯咗，你自己去 update 翻啦。咁我會有個 revision class 咧，主要就係 focus 翻嗰個 midterm test 嗰度點樣去做嘅。好，咁大致上嘅安排係咁多，睇睇同學有冇咩特別嘅問題啦。咁如果冇問題咧，今日就到呢度。咁下個禮拜就會係最後一堂，咁我哋會做埋第8課嘅 exercise 啦。Okay, so see you next week. See if you have any question, you can stay behind and then ask me, and then see you next week.